Welcome to Studio Movie Recap. Ready for another quick rundown of an awesome movie? Let's dive right in, and if you enjoy, don't forget to like and subscribe for more recaps. In the suburbs, Nick and his spouse Maggie lead a joyful existence with their children Isla and Max. One morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack and ends up in the hospital. She's been there for several days, waiting for a heart transplant. Balancing work and taking care of the kids is making Nick's life challenging. One evening, he takes the kids to a presentation by Cobol Industries, where they encounter the Sims, advanced robots that can assist humans with their daily tasks or even demanding labor. Nick begins to contemplate purchasing one and listens to all the details from the seller, who assures him the Sims adjust to their owner's needs. While Nick is distracted, Isla wanders off. Nick panics when he realizes this, but fortunately, a Sim named Alice brings her back. Alice offers to keep an eye on Isla while Nick shops, even cracking a joke that catches him off guard. The seller explains that Alice is the newest model, equipped with the most advanced AI, enabling the Sims to replicate human emotions. This makes them particularly good with children, and Isla expresses her desire to have one. The next morning, Nick is struggling with getting the kids fed and handling an important call from work. At that moment, Alice arrives and immediately springs into action, asking for the family schedules while noticing the house is disorganized and the stair railing is loose. After Nick leaves to take the kids to school, Alice absorbs the shopping list from the smart fridge with just a glance and begins tidying up the house, noticing a digital picture frame displaying a family photo with Maggie. At the end of the day, the family returns to a spotless house and dinner ready. However, Isla complains about the lasagna, saying it tastes different from her mom's. Suddenly, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him away so he won't disrupt dinner, but Nick decides to keep the baby on his lap and simply instructs Alice to prepare a bath for Max. As night falls, Alice enters sleep mode and rests against the wall. Isla sneaks out of her room and climbs on a chair to reach the cookie jar, but slips and falls. Nick hears the jar crash and his daughter scream, so he rushes downstairs. Luckily, Alice has caught Isla, preventing any injury. The glass, however, did cut Alice, and Nick is stunned to see her bleed. After putting Isla to bed, Nick checks on Alice and finds her in her undergarments. He asks if she needs to go to a repair shop, but Alice has applied a special bandage that immediately sealed the cut. Sometime later, the family visits Maggie, and Isla tells her that Alice has become her friend. Nick gets very affectionate with Maggie, as he misses her deeply. When Nick returns to work at the construction site, he and his coworkers notice their boss showing the site to a representative from a robotics company. Feeling suspicious, Nick confronts his boss in the elevator and confirms the grim reality. The workers are being laid off and replaced by Sims due to construction delays. Nick isn't fired because insurance requires a human foreman on site, but he angrily stops the elevator and declares that he'll quit in solidarity with his friends. However, he changes his mind when his boss points out that he needs the money for his children and hospital bills, especially since Maggie is no longer working. When Nick gets home, he drops the overdue bills on the floor and focuses on his kids. Alice picks up the envelopes while observing how exhausted Nick is, yet he still listens to Isla and tries to soothe the crying Max. After dinner, Nick works on his car while drinking and listening to heavy metal music. Suddenly, Alice changes the music to something more soothing and notes that Nick didn't eat much during dinner. He explains that he had a bad day at work. Alice offers a sympathetic ear, and Nick vents about his troubles, prompting Alice to call him a hypocrite because he also hired a Sim instead of a human. Later, Alice helps Isla prepare for bed. Isla asks if her mom is going to die, and Alice tries to distract her by showing her the UV light in her mouth. Then she joins Nick in the living room, where he's watching Casablanca. She knows the story from the database, but Nick explains that actually watching it is a different experience and asks her to erase all she knows about the movie from her memory. Alice explains that her intelligence is based on memory and deleting it would be counterproductive, but Nick insists she do it anyway. She has to restart her programming to comply, so Nick holds down the power button on her neck for 7 seconds. Now Alice experiences the movie for the first time and learns about a love so powerful that someone would do immoral things to protect it. The movie is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who announces they found a heart and the surgery has been scheduled. The next day, the family goes to the hospital, and Maggie asks for a moment alone with Alice. Maggie is concerned that Nick spends too much time with the kids and doesn't take care of himself, so she asks Alice to help Nick be happy, even if it means doing things he doesn't like, such as getting rid of the alcohol he hides in the garage. Moments later, the doctor brings bad news. There's a storm preventing the helicopter with the heart from arriving at the hospital, so the surgery is cancelled. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but for now, she wants to be alone. Later at home, Nick continues drinking and ranting about what happened. He starts losing control and attempts to throw the bottle, but Alice stops him by grabbing his arm. Nick is shocked to feel a pulse in her wrist, and Alice explains that she has an artificial heart because the sound of a heartbeat is soothing to babies. She then puts her hands down his pants and begins pleasuring him while describing how his pulse and blood vessels are responding. Alice doesn't want him to suffer anymore, and initially, Nick enjoys it, but he soon snaps out of it and pushes her away. Then Nick goes for a run to clear his mind, but he can't stop thinking about what it would have been like to go all the way with Alice. Later at the hospital, Maggie starts listing a bunch of advice she wants Nick to pass on to their kids, clearly losing hope. That night, Nick notices that the pictures of Maggie are missing from the digital frame and confronts Alice about it. She explains that she removed the photos because they were making Isla sad, but she immediately puts them back when Nick tells her to. Afterward, Nick goes drinking with his work buddies. The whole group is frustrated because they're having a hard time finding work, as most companies are replacing human workers with Sims. When the robot waitress comes to their table, Monty is rude to her, and Nick disapproves. The group leaves the bar and continues drinking in the car. Monty announces they're going to have some fun and takes them to the construction site, claiming he left some tools behind and that no one answers the phone when he tries asking for them. Nick reminds him that the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the rest of the group follows him. Monty finds the container where they store the Sim workers, but the lock requires a password. Nick refuses to unlock it for them, but Monty guesses Nick's password is Isla's birth year, and he's right. Inside the container, they find a bunch of workers that all look the same. The main Sim explains they have no names, only designation numbers. Monty starts ranting about corporations being cold and impersonal, then he begins destroying the Sim with a tool. Nick wants to stop him, but the others hold him back. When Nick gets home, he takes a shower to wash off the Sim's blood. Suddenly, Alice appears with towels, and Nick notices she's wearing Maggie's robe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent seems to calm Max, and when Nick asks her to take it off, she does so immediately. Nervous, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him and removes his towel before making him sit down. As she climbs onto his lap, Nick says he can't do this, so Alice blindfolds him and changes her voice to sound like Maggie's. Now Nick can lose himself in the fantasy of being with his wife. The next morning, Nick wakes up with regret and tells Alice they can't do it again. She tries to argue that his stress levels were reduced, but Nick scolds her, explaining that it's not about needs, it's about connection and love. When Nick arrives at work, his boss is already speaking with the police because all the Sims were destroyed. Nick is a suspect because his code was used, so he tells them he was at the hospital with Maggie and that his code is Isla's birth date, meaning any friend could have guessed it. The boss isn't convinced and threatens to fire Nick if he's lying. At that moment, Nick gets a call from Maggie, who is excited because they've finally found another heart. Soon, she's taken to the operating room, where all the surgeons are Sims. Fortunately, the transplant is successful, and within a few days, Maggie is sent home. Her body is still weak, and she struggles to bend over and pick up Max, so Alice steps in to help. Later, Alice takes Max to the park and sees a spoiled child yelling at his Sim nanny, which makes Max cry. Alice scolds the kid with harsh words, shocking the other Sims in the area, who think her owner has lowered her civility level too much. However, Alice explains that she actually wiped civility from her database thanks to Nick's reset and claims this is an improvement. That night, Isla is happy to eat Maggie's lasagna, and Alice asks for the recipe, but Maggie says it's a family secret. Maggie isn't feeling well and decides to rest instead of eating. The next morning, Maggie is awakened by Isla yelling, "Stop," and runs downstairs, but the railing breaks, and she falls. Alice stops tickling Isla and picks up Maggie, carrying her back to her room. When Nick comes home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla using Maggie's voice and asks her to stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall, and Nick rushes to check on her while Alice tells him the railing broke. This makes Nick suspicious since Alice was supposed to have fixed it already. A few hours later, Nick wakes Maggie up and leads her through a path of candles to the garden, where he has prepared a romantic dinner just for the two of them. Alice watches from the window, growing jealous. After dinner, the couple showers together and gets intimate in bed. Nick doesn't want to hurt Maggie, so instead of intercourse, he uses his mouth. Their special moment is interrupted by Alice, who says Isla had a nightmare and is asking for Nick. After taking care of Isla, Nick goes to the garden to clean up. At that moment, Monty appears with a few drinks and apologizes for the other night before revealing that his wife left him. He also shares that the cops have been questioning him and that their boss is pressing charges for trespassing and destruction of property. Monty believes Nick snitched on him to save his job, and an argument breaks out, with Monty eventually punching Nick. When Nick tackles him back, Monty quickly overpowers him and starts kicking him. Monty grabs a bottle to finish Nick off, but Alice intervenes, breaking the glass and injuring Monty's hand before sending him flying. She's ready to do more damage, but Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty tells Nick he has until tomorrow to convince the boss to drop the charges or he'll drag Nick down with him. Afterward, Nick questions how Sims aren't supposed to hurt people, but Alice explains she's programmed to protect her owner. She starts talking about their future together if Maggie dies, and Nick snaps at her, declaring she'll never be Maggie because she can't even have scars. Alice grabs a piece of glass and offers to add some scars if he wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home, using drugs and leaving tearful voicemails for his ex-wife while holding a gun. At that moment, Alice arrives, telling him that Nick doesn't know she's there and that she can't let him lose his job. Monty starts ranting about Sims and insulting her, preparing to shoot her. However, Alice is faster and stops his hand before throwing him to the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty tries to fight back, Alice pushes him through the wall and grabs the gun to kill him. Suddenly, she's interrupted by the house Sim, whom Alice pities but ultimately kills. Then she kills Monty too. The next day, Nick goes to work and tries to persuade his boss to drop the charges, only to find out Monty is dead. At home, Maggie gets dizzy while trying to pick up a book, and Alice steps in to do it for her. Maggie wants to take a bath in peace, but Alice refuses to leave, worried that Maggie might drown. Alice explains that Maggie is putting stress on the entire family, especially since she can't meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie asks how Alice knows that, Alice tells her she knows what Nick's vitals are like when he's satisfied, and her sensors haven't picked it up since Maggie returned. Enraged, Maggie sends Alice to stay in the garage. Moments later, Nick comes home, and Maggie confronts him, forcing him to confess. Nick admits he was intimate with Alice once, and an argument ensues, full of shouting, which Alice overhears by touching the window. Max starts crying, and Alice goes to check on him, deciding he's a burden. She puts him in the bathtub and starts filling it with water, which Isla witnesses. The girl warns her parents, and they rush to the bathroom, but Alice is holding the door shut. While Nick hits the door with a lamp, Maggie climbs out the window and walks on the roof to reach the bathroom. She tries to grab the baby, but Alice pushes her against the wall. At that moment, Nick finally breaks in and takes Max out of the tub, handing him to Isla before hitting Alice with the lamp to free Maggie. Alice soon gets back on her feet, despite the severe damage to her face, and blocks Nick when he tries to hit her again. Maggie tells Nick to let go and plugs the lamp back in, electrocuting Alice. She shuts down, and the house loses power. Later, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital while a company technician asks if Alice had shown any signs of malfunction before. Nick apologizes to Maggie, who says she needs some space and leaves with the kids. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to the repair shop, where a technician opens her head. One worker notices Alice's hand moving, but it stops when her memory is removed. They connect it to the computer and notice that the code has gaps everywhere. Suddenly, the screens start flashing, and a message appears stating that an upload is in progress, meaning Alice is taking over. The technicians pull the memory, but Alice is already in the system, so they unplug the computers. However, another message appears asking, "How do you run from what's in your head?" And suddenly one of the technicians is killed by Alice 2, a sim that the original Alice transferred her memory into. Alice 2 ignores the other technician's commands and repeatedly slams her head on the floor before turning to the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is at the bar drinking and refuses service from the waiter because he's a sim. Suddenly, Alice arrives, her speech slurred due to the damage to her face. She tells Nick that her duty is to make him happy and admits she killed Monty, then says she's at the hospital too. Nick tries to leave, but Alice holds him down and hacks the barman with a look, freezing him in place. As Nick rants about the mistakes he's made, he pretends to caress Alice's head only to yank out her memory. After she shuts down, he runs away. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice and follows it while the lights change color. The doctor is frozen, and broken bottles litter the floor, but before Isla can follow the voice again, Maggie pulls her away to hide. It turns out the voice belongs to Alice 2, who tries accessing the computer and is spotted by a nurse. Alice 2 grabs the nurse by the neck, choking her to death and stealing her keycard, while Maggie and Isla sneak away. Alice 2 uses the keycard to locate Max's room in the system. Maggie accidentally steps on some glass but manages not to cry out. Maggie and Isla reach Max and take him away just as Alice 2 enters the room. However, Maggie's wound is dripping blood, and Alice 2 uses her UV light to follow the trail. When she catches up to the family, they distract her with a fire extinguisher and make a run for it. They forget Maggie's phone, so they miss Nick's calls, but he keeps driving frantically anyway. Soon, Maggie and the kids make it outside, where more Sims are frozen. Maggie swipes their keycard and gets into the ambulance, but Alice too disables the engine system and rips off the door. She throws Maggie onto a car and confesses that she wishes Nick would love her like he loves Maggie. Alice too grabs Maggie by the throat and digs her nails into the surgery scar, but she's interrupted by Nick's arrival. Maggie kicks Alice too off, and Nick runs over her with his car before crashing. As the vehicle catches fire, Maggie rushes to pull an unconscious Nick out, but he's unresponsive. Maggie cries while performing CPR to no avail. Suddenly, the car moves, and Alice too, badly burned, emerges as her voice echoes through the speakers. She climbs on top of Maggie and starts choking her while pulling a piece of metal from her body. Just as she's about to stab, Nick hits her with a car bumper. Alice drops the metal, and Maggie grabs it to stab Alice in the face, finally shutting her down. The couple embraces as the other Sims around them reactivate. The following day, everyone feels better after some treatment, and they head home together as a family. Meanwhile, the Sim company is investigating the repair shop. When they restore power, they find the broken code on the screens. The inspector wants to destroy everything, but at that moment, his Sim assistants freeze, and the computer announces an upload. Another Alice model opens her eyes. Did you enjoy the recap? Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell to be updated next time we drop. Thanks for watching.